Welcome to the Performance Measurement Work Group meeting. As we customarily do, we'll go around the room and just say who's here today, and then we'll ask for folks on the phone to introduce themselves, and then we'll launch right into the agenda. So I'm Diane Feeney from the Commission here.
Julia Girovich, HSCRC.
Allison Schuster, HSCRC.
Megan Rutke, South River High School.
Bob Murray, representing Care First.
Linda Costa, University of Maryland School of Nursing.
Fozzie Sabi, Mid-Atlantic Permanente Medical Group.
Chad Perman, DHMH, Population Health.
Trisha Roddy, Medicaid.
Ed Baranek, Johns Hopkins Health System.
Stephanie Clapper, Maryland Citizens Health Initiative.
Zahid Butt, Medisolve, but I'm representing myself and not on behalf of the company.
Noy Reed, HSCRC.
Denise Johnson, HSCRC.
Andy Udom, HSCRC.
Denise Emmer, HSCRC.
And then people on the phone, if Kim, do we have some members on the phone?
Yes, there are.
Okay. Please.
I did.
Teresa Lee.
Hi, Teresa.
Hi.
Thelma with VHEC.
Oh, welcome, Thelma. Thank you. Okay, great. Thank you. As others join, we'll just, Kim, if you can just acknowledge, and we'll, when there's a break, and we'll welcome them. So first, we'll ask Allison to introduce our special guest, Megan Rutke. Allison and I went to rounds at Anne Arundel Medical Center at 6:30 on Friday morning, and had our first opportunity to hear from Megan and some of the work that she's done, sort of as from her own initiative in terms of her work as a junior in high school. So go ahead.
Great. Well, thank you. We thought we would invite Megan today to come and present to us on her work. Megan is an 11th grade student at South River High School's Global Communication and Public Affairs Signature Program. Through the Signature Program, she has found an interest in healthcare and infection prevention, which has led her to research hospital performance. She hopes that her research will help save lives by helping hospitals effectively evaluate and improve their performance in infection prevention. Based on her work that she'll be presenting today, Megan has won a first-place prize in the medical science category, as well as 7 other awards from the U.S. Public Health Service and the Naval Research Institute. Besides healthcare research, Megan is also interested in Spanish, international relations, and sailing. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Megan.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here, and thank you for having me.
We do have Megan's slides also in the hard copy packets. Yeah. Okay. Great. And they're on the webinar. Okay.
Well, again, my name is Megan Rutke, and I'm happy to be presenting my evaluation of potentially preventable hospital-acquired infection rates in Maryland hospitals. I'd like to first discuss the MHAC program, the Maryland Hospital Acquired Conditions Initiative. The MHAC program, as you may be familiar with, assesses 46 Maryland hospitals based on rates of potentially preventable complications. Hospitals will report the number of cases of PPCs experienced each quarter, and then MHAC uses their scoring system to rank hospitals and score hospitals based on their performance. They employ an observed over expected ratio to account for difference in hospital size and patient mix. Additionally, an MHAC percent at-risk scaling is used to determine a good, bad, or average score for each hospital, for which the hospital can be financially rewarded or penalized. There are 65 types of PPCs, and a very similar program arranges these PPCs into 8 groups. And so the group that I will be focusing on today, Group 5, are the infectious complications, which include 6 PPCs. Through my research, I've isolated the data from these 6 PPCs to create a PPHAI score. I've renamed the PPCs potentially preventable hospital-acquired infections. These 6 PPHAIs are C. diff, cellulitis, moderate infections, septicemia and severe infections, UTI without catheter, and catheter-related UTI. So I've isolated the data from these 6 PPHAIs, and I've used MHAC scoring methodology to generate a PPHAI score for 28 hospitals, the hospitals which included data for all 6 PPHAIs. And from here, I can compare the PPHAI score to the MHAC score. These are some of my findings. I found that in some cases, in many cases, MHAC scores may be too broad to effectively identify the microtrends in infection prevention. So although they're an excellent tool for measuring hospital performance as a whole, MHAC scores can be enhanced when you look at the PPHAI scores, when you isolate certain sets of data to see these microtrends. 20 hospitals have considerable score differences. That is a score difference between their PPHAI score and MHAC score of more than 0.05 points. This is over 70% of the hospitals I studied. The average difference between the MHAC score and the PPHAI score is 11 points, with 12 hospitals having higher PPHAI scores than MHAC scores and 15 hospitals having lower PPHAI scores than MHAC score. Only 1 hospital received the same score. For example, if we look on the chart to the right, we can see Doctors Community. It has one of the lowest MHAC scores and one of the highest PPHAI scores with a staggering difference of 38 points. This 38-point difference is larger than the entire spread of MHAC scores, which we'll discuss next. In this image, you can see comparison of MHAC scores and PPHAI scores for each hospital. Each hospital is displayed on a vertical line, and it's represented by 2 dots, the blue dot being the MHAC score and the orange dot being the PPHAI score. The green band at the top is the range of scores in which that are considered good, whereas the red score at the bottom is considered below average. And so using this visual aid, you can see the difference between each hospital's scores. Additionally, the distributions of MHAC scores and PPHAI scores vary considerably. The PPHAI distribution is wider than the distribution of MHAC scores by 19 points. On the graph to the left, you can see that the spread for PPHAI scores is 53 points, whereas MHAC score is only 34 points. This suggests that when you look at just the PPHAIs, there's a more varied performance between hospitals, that hospitals are more likely to be either really good or really bad, and there's more polarized performance. Additionally, PPHAI scores are generally slightly lower than MHAC scores, and this may indicate that hospitals struggle more with preventing infections than with preventing other types of PPCs. Next, what I did was I wanted to observe the performance trends of individual PPHAIs over time using the observed over expected ratio. So when the observed over expected ratio equals 1, that is when hospitals are performing at standard, at expected rates. My main discovery when observing this data is that often hospitals do not improve or decline uniformly. Often they will improve and then get worse, or get worse and then improve. And so this may indicate that hospitals are unaware of how they are performing or what that they do that really works for them. And so they may continue to change their strategy unnecessarily. For example, in the graph to the left, we have, bottom left, we have hospitals based on their percentage change in OE scores. And so as we can see, between the first time period shown in red and the second time period shown in blue for each hospital, we will have percent improvement and then percent decline. If we look at the graph to the right, we can see hospitals based on their performance. I've pointed out Northwest Hospital, indicated by NW, because its score is in the red at 2.5, and then it improves drastically to about a 0.05, which is good, and then it gets worse again and lands back in that red area at the top, which is a bad score. So if we continue through here, we get to the moderate infection OE ratio, and here I'd like to point out that the scale has changed. Rather than with the last PPCs, the scale being 250% decline, this is 900%. So the scale has changed where this is, these PPCs, we get into more change than we've seen in the previous ones. And so the conclusions and applications I've drawn for my project is that the PPHAI score measurement provides increased accuracy in measuring infection prevention performance. So if hospitals look not only at the MHAC score, but also calculate their own PPHAI score, they can better identify their own microtrends in infection prevention performance. And then using this metric, they can implement it, and then as they implement new methods for disinfection and infection prevention, then they can evaluate the performance of those practices because this PPHAI score is focused on PPHAI prevention. I would love to take any questions. For more information about my methodology and findings, you can visit my website, www.saver.org, or you can email me at meganrutke@gmail.com. Do we have any questions? Thank you so much.
So it's Albert Wu on the phone. Sorry, I'm coming on late. Can you hear me?
Albert. Yes, we can hear you. Welcome. We are just having a presentation from one of our guest speakers from Megan Rutke from South River High School.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So a couple of questions. One is that one of your last conclusions was that this was a more accurate method. And so, the question, maybe you didn't get a chance to present this, but the question would be, the scores are different from the MHAC scores, but what evidence can you show us that these estimates are more accurate? And then the second question is that when people are looking at quality scores, they often look at stability in scores from period to period as evidence for reliability, and they often judge that if you have big differences quarter to quarter, that doesn't necessarily suggest that your measure is good. In fact, it might be unreliable, and what you're measuring may be more random noise than actual performance. I don't think that it's necessarily realistic to think that hospitals are even capable of making significant changes in, for example, their infection control policy across all of the places where they take care of patients from quarter to quarter. It's very hard for us to make any changes, to get our doctors to make any changes of any kind. So the fluctuation from period to period does not necessarily, to me, indicate that this is a better measure.
In response to your first question about whether or not these scores or how I can prove that these scores are more accurate, I just look at the data. So if we're a hospital, we're looking at our infection prevention performance, we don't want to be looking at the heart attacks that other patients have that are also recorded in the MHAC score. We don't want to look at the strokes because those are not infection related. And so by isolating this data, we do create a score that is not more accurate for the hospital overall. It doesn't include those strokes or heart attacks or other conditions, but it is more pinpointed. It's more focused towards that infection lens. And so that is why I would say that it is more accurate when you're looking at infection prevention performance, separate from other performance in other prevention areas. Additionally, you mentioned whether or not the score, because there may be fluctuations, whether or not that indicates that the score is unreliable. I look at the score as measuring hospital performance rather than hospital performance. I look at the score as responding to hospital performance rather than the other way around. So the score does reflect, how hospitals the performance may fluctuate going up and down. So this is really just a measurement, and this is what it is picking up. Hospitals may, their performance may fluctuate depending on time periods, and so using the score, we can measure that and try to see if we can reduce that fluctuation and have a more constant performance. Did that answer your question?
It does. I think that measures, I think that calling this more focused and more accurate is probably, more informative, and I would certainly agree that it makes sense to focus on infections because that is more actionable than focusing on everything in the world. I do think that measures themselves that we use need to be reliable and valid, and we need evidence that our measures are reliable and valid.
Albert, we did, I'm sorry to cut you off, but we did do, if you remember in one of the earlier meetings this year, we did look at validity and reliability of the measures, and Mathematica did an analysis of 3 years, and there were only a few that wasn't, that didn't meet the test for the reliability. I think we appreciate Megan's work, and I think she's a gem, and we are going to see what she's going to do with her life in the future. We brought her in because I think her analysis of infection versus the MHAC is something we need to think about as we are thinking how we are going to change our programs in the future. As you know, we discussed the service line concept, trying to look at the patients within receiving similar services, and Megan's analysis is pointing out another aspect, whether we need to think about with the related PPCs and look at the performance from a related PPC lens. So we do appreciate her coming all the way here as well. And any other questions from the members?
So first of all, congratulations, great work. Just a comment, this sort of may come back to this issue of when you lump a lot of different things together, perhaps you lose the fidelity of the measurement. And it's sort of, I've still been trying to reconcile that ADI studies that we have been doing in terms of the socio-demographic impact on readmissions, that it really, when we applied the ADI in the Mathematica study, although it lowered the overall rate, but it actually didn't really change the relative performance amongst the different hospitals, which was something counterintuitive to what we were expecting. And I'm just wondering whether that methodology may have had a similar effect, because the ADI was a composite of all the different specific factors. And if there were 1 or 2 factors that were, because that's kind of what Megan is trying to point from the data, that when you throw in the 65 PPCs together, that perhaps they don't discriminate as well as if you narrow it down to a very specific focus. And so perhaps if the individual components of the ADI were to be applied, perhaps they would, in some cases, show more discrimination between things. Just wondering. But I think this is something, as you pointed out, worth exploring further. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. I know that she'll be taking off in a few minutes to get back to school, but I appreciate everybody's attention and comments.
Yes, thanks, Megan. So next on the agenda, Andy Zumbrum's going to go over some GBR infrastructure reporting template updates for us in the coming year.
Okay, so hopefully everyone has received the final template for the GBR infrastructure updates for fiscal 16. We want to thank everyone who served on the subgroup one more time for all of your draft comments. We've included many of the comments, and we've updated the reporting fields to hopefully make the report slightly less onerous for people moving forward. Yesterday we held a webinar where we hope many people who are going to be actually filling out the reports were able to click through with us and see how to fill out the template. We didn't have a lot of questions as people are filling out the reports, which again are due in September 30th. Please direct all your questions to me instead of Allison. She's very busy. So I've put my email and phone number on all of the correspondence, so just send any inquiries to me about that. So I just had a couple of slides mentioning our general purpose of the reports. So the infrastructure dollars are a specific set of dollars that are permanently in hospital rates, but the infrastructure reports are actually going to speak to a number of different purposes for HSCRC. So we're asking for hospitals to report all population health investments that are beginning fiscal 14 or later, and we'll be using this to better inform our understanding of population health investments at the hospital level. We also are looking at the financial data on this. There have been a number of discussions about how much money hospitals need to be spending on population health, so we're looking at the financial data. And finally, for recommendations from the Commission, we're really trying to better understand outcomes and process metrics this year, which we weren't able to do in the earlier template. Again, we're focused in population health on care coordination, short-term reductions in potentially avoidable utilization, building capacity to partner with existing community partners, and evaluating the outcomes of these investments.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yep.
I'm Fazzi Sabi. I'm with Kaiser Permanente and Mid-Atlantic Permanente Medical Group. So for a lot of the hospitals where we have the majority of our patients, we also invest a lot in the population health, and we partner with the hospitals. Mm-hmm. How are you going to account for those investments?
So there is a line if hospitals want to itemize that. There's a line they can, take credit for that and then just itemize how much of it was funded by external source. So if it's a true partnership, then they can say, we're really working with this, and this is the amount of money that the hospital's investing. This is the amount of money total in the investment. Okay, so, and then just most of the improvements to the template were to make it easier for the people who are reporting it, but we are asking, last year the reviewers coded everything into categories, and that was a little bit controversial, and it was also a lot of work, so we're asking hospitals to do that categorization, and we've left all of the categories that the subgroup came up with and itemized. We've left that all into the instructions. And we're allowing people to put different categories for each investment. And so we have 2 new questions for this year. As many of you know from the RFP process that we are trying to better track return on investment. So we've included a question about that this year. And we are also moving to better understand the impact of population health investments on the total cost of care, or the way we phrased it in the report is on impact on costs of non-hospital services. And so these 2 questions are new this year, and they're not as nuanced. So this is just we're adding it in, and we hope it to be more nuanced in future years. But please do try to answer those questions. So again, I mentioned that we are focused on outcome and process metrics. The process metrics, we've left broad latitude for the hospitals to say this is what we're tracking to see whether this investment is a worthwhile investment this year and then moving forward. And then the outcomes we have as kind of a roll-up. It would be really hard to do. You'd have to do some kind of regression analysis to figure out what the individual investment impact was on your larger readmission score. We're not interested in it. We're kind of from a holistic level. Here are the investments that you did that are probably going to affect readmissions, and then have a broader discussion. So we tried to make that clearer. And just a reminder that they're due on September 30th, and let me know if you have any questions.
I think just as a background a little bit too, increasingly the staff is getting an input from both commissioners and the stakeholders that we need to get a better understanding of the level of implementation for population health. So this report originally was structured to look at, the resources provided for the infrastructure amount and kind of get a handle of how much is spent on population health. And the Commission acknowledged that the money put into the rates was very small percentage of what is needed. So with that, we didn't restrict that to the only the rate increases. It is a larger report to include all the population health infrastructure investments. And increasingly, as you see, the report is emphasizing the outcomes in the process for us to be able to look at the implementation and the progress there. And I think it's going to come at the end about our strategic decision. As a performance measurement work group, I do think that we need to think about what the new measures should be in terms of addressing the needs for tracking progress and outcomes on population health. So I think we built Megan's presentation and infrastructure. So when we discuss the strategic, I would like to think more about what that means and how we can integrate it and create performance measures for future. With that, I guess we are into the next agenda item, which is me. So we did the draft recommendation at the commission meeting, and we forwarded the same draft to you. And I just want to summarize what the staff draft recommendation is, and then Mathematica is going to update us on their risk adjustment modeling that they've been doing. And we also have some measurement changes that Allison is going to talk. As you know, last year was the first year we implemented the 2% penalty maximum and 1% reward, and the target was at 9.3%. So we are doing better than the nation in terms of our improvement rates. But we have discovered an issue with the ICD-10. So this trend is showing that at the base, with the new version of the measure, we have 8% difference. And by 2015, we reduced that to 4.8%. So in the next slide, I have the calculation of whether we're meeting the target or not. In slide 10, what we have is the base year 2013 national Medicare readmission rate, which is at 15.4%, the row A, and the Maryland rate is at 16.61%. So this is from the previous graph. So when we look at the difference between the two, we have about 1.23 percentage points. I did percentage points because then the math is easier to do. So every year we have to exceed the national improvement by, or close the gap between national and Maryland by 0.25 percentage points. So then if you look at the performance year calculations, for calendar year 14, the national change was actually positive, so their readmission rate increased by 0.71%. So their rate is at 15.5%. So when we take the 0.25% difference down, so the rate difference between national and the Maryland readmission rate was supposed to be at 0.98 percentage points. So that gave us the Maryland target readmission rate of 16.47%. So this is 15.5 minus the plus the 9.8. So then the actual rate that we have is at 16.47%. So we made the first year target barely there. And if you remember last year, we really didn't know because the measure was in transition. So this is the first time that we kind of looked at it and established that we made the first year target. So then the next two columns are kind of looking at our target percent growth and then what that we actually did. So then the next two rows are doing a similar calculation by using two different time points. One is looking at the November trend and the other one is looking at the December trend. Similarly, our target for the difference is at 0.73 percentage points. So that gives us on column E a target of 16.17% for Maryland rate. And in the November trend, the actual readmission rate for Maryland is at 16.11%. So the difference between national and the Maryland is at 0.67%. So if you use the Maryland trend, we narrowed it even more, so we are making the target. Compared to 0.73 percentage points, our difference is at 0.67 percentage points. But if you use the December trend, as you see, the difference is at 0.75%. So we are not making the target for the second year. So when we started in December, we were looking at August trend, and there was a big, nice cushion in our trend, but within a matter of a couple months, we really ate up that cushion, and now we are at this very precarious point that a few percentage points are going to make a difference. However, what is happening is that with the ICD-10, October, November, December trends are problematic because of the rehab exclusion that we have in the national data. So, I think once we have that correction, we will still make the trend and the target this year. However, I don't think that we are going to have that big of a cushion that we originally expected looking at the August trend. Does that make sense? Any questions on this?
A quick question. Do you have a sense of when the ICD-10 issues might be better understood or resolved?
So Cmmi is really helping us. So they send the data on Monday. We looked at the psych, whether psych was impacting, it didn't. So we don't particularly understand why rehab is making such a big impact on the readmission rate. If you think about it, their readmission rate is lower. So they promised us to send another data this week, right? So we'll see what it shows. If the assumption is correct and it's the rehab, then we'll have an answer by next week. But if we don't see the trend kind of corrected, then we need to go back and scratch our heads again. Ed?
So with the 9-month trend, so if you cut it off in September, how does that look? Because that would be clean all with I-9. It's just kind of as a comparison.
I should bring I'll send you the monthly trend. So what's happening is actually there is a seasonality in the readmissions, and the readmission rate picks up in November and December. So it was in September we are definitely making, but because of that spike in the rate, it is hard for us to make the assumption with the September trend. That's why I'm not including the September.
Sheila, from a long-term standpoint, if the CMS one will continue to exclude the rehabs, will we try to match it here, or and then have the with rehab as a separate measure?
So we'll get to it. We received some feedback on the rehab not being properly described as planned. The plan algorithm is not picking up the rehab readmissions correctly. And with the ICD-10 issues too, Allison is going to get in more detail, but we think we should exclude the rehabs from our program as well, and clean up the trend and redo the base year and the performance year.
Thank you.
Yep. But the other exclusion is the psych, and we are not excluding psych patients because they have a higher readmission rate, and we should make sure we address them. So these are the list of issues that we reviewed with you in the past. I just put it out there. So as you know, we focused after the review the issue between the relationship between readmission rate itself and the improvement rate. And we again appreciate the MHA and the Care First help on this. I think they were quite helpful for us to think about it and how to just make adjustments. So the recommendation, the draft recommendation, included kind of based on the MHA proposal, but modified, and also we would still want to look at the risk adjustment a little bit more. But for the readmissions out of state, the solution was to use Medicare ratios to adjust all payer rates. And then since the program is looking at improvement and attainment at the same time, if you do this change, the idea is even if the hospital's readmission rates will be reduced for those who have a socioeconomic burden, let's say, those hospitals are performing because they're improving faster than the rest of the hospital. So they are gaining from the improvement even if they are losing from the attainment. So because they balance it out at the end, that reduces the significance of the socioeconomic adjustment for the program this year. And for the benchmarks, the staff is proposing to use the highest benchmarks for the threshold for the rewards, and also for the improvement, again, use the state target of 9.3 or 9.5 for next year for the adjustments. So in sum for the 2018, so we separated the recommendations for 2018, which is the current performance year, and 2017, which is the past, that we want to make adjustments to. So for 2018, we are recommending to keep the policy on an all-payer basis, and then include the attainment, better of attainment and improvement. And also, then the benchmarks for the attainment, we are recommending to set it at the top quartile readmission rate, so the rewards will start at that level, and set the reduction target at 9.5%. From the 2013 levels. This 9.5, we are going to look at that number again for the final, depending on what the final data shows. It may change a little bit. I'm feeling a little uncomfortable right now with that number, to be honest, seeing the trends. Bob, do you have a question on that?
Could you just elaborate on I mean, the basis, the idea is that now that you're adding attainment, you want to make sure that there's sufficient incentive to improve, so you would potentially make that target more rigorous?
I mean, that's one we should discuss, whether that, that we need to increase the target even more, because now we have an attainment, so not all hospitals are going to improve. My comment was on the Cmmi trends. This was modeled with the August data, and given the changes in the trends, we are working on doing its final modeling with the final Cmmi data to see if this number is still reasonable or we need to increase it just to hit the Medicare target. And then on top of it, the idea is if we have attainment, is it reasonable to assume a similar improvement trend this year?
Okay.
And then for 2017, we are recommending, we had 3 options in the initial draft, and if we have an attainment model that we feel comfortable, staff is proposing to use the same model for 2017 and apply a 9.3% target for the improvement. And as I said, we'll talk with the mathematical presentation too. We are still evaluating the impact of risk adjustment, but at this point, I think staff is not as concerned with the risk adjustment. So, okay, this is quite, I would suggest that you guys look at your printout. So the way, just the technical aspect of how we combine attainment and improvement. And so the first one is the improvement scale that we had established. And because of the distribution, we have to put bounds to the maximum and minimum penalties. So last year, we set that at 18% improvement. So any hospital who achieved 18% or higher improvement rates would get 1% reward. And then the 0% adjustment, as you see, is at 9.3%. And then down, if the hospital had lower improvement rates, we kept it at up to 9% increase in their readmission rate. So any hospital who got the 9% increase or higher receive 2% penalty on improvement. And the middle column is kind of converting into a continuous scale to make the calculation. So for the attainment scale, we are taking the same differences, and then we applied the penalties accordingly. So the column B and column E are the connecting dots. So hospitals receive a 1% reward either have to improve 18% or more, or their rate would be either 11.04% or lower. And with that, the 0 penalty is associated with 12.09%, which is the top quartile readmission rate in calendar year 2015. And with that, if we use the same bounds, then the hospitals with 14.3% or higher readmission rates are subject to 2% penalty. Once we apply these two, depending on the dollar results, we just take the best results for each hospital to combine the two. Any questions on this? All right, let's finish the rest of it, and then we'll have the discussion afterward.
Great. So quickly, we just want to talk about the readmission measurement. For rate year 18, the changes that we will be applying and then, running the 2013 base year data over again would be that there is a new planned admission logic, version 4, that has come out that we will implement. We're going to change the transfer logic to include the same and next day admissions as transfers. And then we're still working out the specifications for this, but we are looking to remove the rehab cases using the type of daily service because of these ICD-10 issues and other clinical concerns. And then we're looking for rate year 18 to also suspend oncology cases based upon the APR DRGs, based on feedback that we've had that the planned admission logic isn't properly sort of accounting for cancer patients with multiple admissions. In terms of rate year 17, the current results that we have out are preliminary. We are going to apply the same adjustment for rehab and rerun the rate year 17 logic, and that would include rerunning the base period and potentially the norms and the rates. And then when we do this, we'll also be refreshing the data to have the most current EIDs and the most current January data for the December readmissions. Anything to add? Any questions on those changes? We'll be putting together just a one-pager on what are the changes to the planned admission logic, as well as what are the codes we'll use for these other exclusions so that everybody can have that for clarity.
All right, so Mathematica is going to update on the risk adjustment model, and I don't know if it is at the end of, you have a printout of their slides. Is it part of the deck, or do we need to change it? Yep, there you go.
Great, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks, Shirley. Hello, everyone. Happy to be chatting with you all again this month. Just want to give an overview of what we've been up to since we last talked in April. On slide 2, just want to give you an overview of what we've been doing in general. Essentially, we've been trying to take the current approach, this risk standardization approach, and convert it into a regression-based adjustment model, which facilitates the ability of us to test the impact of additional covariates in the model, things like age and gender and comorbidities, payer, ADI. And what we can do is run these models using the regression framework and test how well the model is doing, how well they're testing, how well they're predicting readmissions and readmission rates, how much of the explanatory power that they have, and kind of run essentially a horse race between the models to see how they're doing. On slide 3, I'm just going to talk briefly about the new work we've been doing since we last chatted. We tested 2 new model specifications. The first is what we call an ADI-only model. So the only covariates in the model are the individual indicators for the ADI percentile of the patients, this is the patient-level ADI. And then because we want to test whether or not indirectly test the relationship between ADI versus case mix. What you'll see in the next slide is that the ADI-only model doesn't perform very well. The second model that we estimated, it takes our fully controlled model, we called model 20 the last time we chatted, and adds to it a hospital level control. And that hospital level control is the percentage of patients that are from high ADI areas, where high ADI is defined as the 85th percentile or higher. So at the hospital level control is sort of indicating that at the hospital level that a hospital is seeing more or less patients from those high ADI areas, while simultaneously controlling for the patient level ADI, so allowing for within hospital variation in ADI. The second big thing we did was we had to rerun our analyses of the improvement rates. I think, as you may recall, when I presented last month, there was a graph that showed that for the comparison of the improvement rates from model 20 versus baseline and what what was indicated is that using model 20, that improvement rates got lower or worse, if you will, almost across the board for hospitals, and that seemed to be counterintuitive, and there were some questions about that. So we went back and we dug into the data a little bit more, and what we found is that we were those results had some bias introduced from ICD-10, our old friend ICD-10. When we developed the models on calendar year 2013 data, we had no issues with ICD-10, but when we took those models and applied them to the full calendar year 2015 data, which includes that last quarter of ICD-10 data, we essentially spuriously underestimated the number of comorbidities since the LX hazard comorbidity is based on ICD-9 codes. So when that algorithm was run on the 2015 data, those ICD-10 codes were run through the algorithm. The algorithm said, okay, no, these are comorbidities, so it looked like everyone in Maryland had no comorbidities in quarter 4 of 2010, which led to an underprediction of readmissions, which led to higher observed or expected ratios and higher rates, which led to less improvement. But that was a bias produced by ICD-10. So what we've done is we've gone back and rerun that improvement, that analysis of the improvement rates. But what we've done is we've taken quarter 4 out of both 2013 and 2015 to circumvent that issue. I'll just note that since we developed all the models in calendar year 13 data, this issue doesn't really affect the validity or the performance of the models. It was really just more of an issue of how to implement them on the 2015 data. Okay, slide 4, or my slide 4. So summary of the models. What I've done here is I've highlighted in blue the new model that we've added. So you can see that the B2 is really what we call the ADI only model, and then model 21 is sort of the kitchen sink model, with the model 20 with the hospital level ADI control in there, high ADI control in there as well. Those are the 2 new additions. Slide 5. What you can see is that the ADI only model performs very poorly. The C statistic is not too much higher than 0.5, and if you recall, a C statistic of 0.5 indicates that your model is doing no better than a coin flip in terms of predicting readmissions. And the R square is also very, very low. So that model is not performing very well at all. And then if you look down at model 21, you can see that adding in that hospital level control slightly improves the predictability in terms of a higher C statistic over model 20, and also slightly improves the explanatory power, as you see in the R squared, so that's slightly higher than what we see in model 20. Slide 6. So here is showing you, you saw this graph last month. This is the rerun of that graph, taking out quarter 3 and quarter 4 to address that ICD-10 issue. And we can see is that actually when you use model 20, the improvement rates actually get a little bit better or higher. The improvement rates are higher using model 20. The explanation here is that relative to baseline, when you the addition of the covariates are picking up that there's a slightly, I'm using air quotes here, a sicker population in the hospitals in 2015. That is that there are the set of patients that are being treated in the hospitals in 2015 are slightly more likely to be readmitted along those covariates that aren't being captured already by the APR, DRG, SOI category. So we took a look at some of the just basic descriptive statistics, and we saw that patients in 2015 have slightly more comorbidities than in 2013. Their APR weights are slightly higher, indicating that their inpatient stays are more resource intensive. They're slightly older, and so what that's doing is the use of the APR, DRG, SOI categories on their own are not picking up those slight the slight increase in risk along those dimensions, and by controlling for them in the Model 20 model, you actually pick that up and you can start to make better predictions, or I should say, you predict those. You reflect that increased risk in those expected rates, so the expected rates get a little bit larger. The denominator of the observer expected ratio gets bigger, which leads to lower rates and slightly better improvement. And finally, slide 7 is showing the results of using Model 21, which is that model which uses the hospital level high ADI control. Generally speaking, looks very similar to what we see with Model 20. So we don't see a whole lot of impact of using that Model 21 either. And with that, I think that's the end of my slides. So I'm happy to take questions.
It's Albert. I'm a little surprised to see that ADI didn't predict very well, at least on its own. And, you know, I'm not sure that if ADI was, if we would really expect ADI to predict readmission, but, you know, one would think it should. Is the ADI not, you know, sort of as good a measure as, at least for us, as we think it should be? If it is not, might we try to refine it somehow? For example, looking at micro zip codes, zip +4, might that help us out?
So before Matt answers, so the ADI, we developed it at the census block level, so it's about a group level. It's about 1,000 people. So it's even kind of smaller than the zip code plus.
Okay.
So I think the issue is the level of analysis at the individual level. We are not seeing ADI as a good predictor. But when you group them and look at it at the geography, at the census block level, we clearly see a strong relationship. So the areas where they are most deprived, they have high readmission rate. And then when we look at hospital level too, we do clearly see that hospitals with most deprived patients, so that 85% and above, they do have high readmission rates too. So, you know, I think the relationship is more complex than what we are building in the regression could be one. And I think Dr. Butt kind of is thinking maybe it's too composite. We need to look at maybe individual impact and see if any of them is significant at the patient level.
Okay, that helps a lot.
Shuli, also just wanted to get your thought on, could it be that with the ADI approach, you look at an area, an urban area, you could have 5 or 10 hospitals sort of serving more or less the same population, in which case, because you're looking at it on a geographic basis, it kind of gets back to this idea of it is too aggregated. You can't actually pick up the impact of being disadvantaged as it applies to individual hospitals. It's too diffuse. I'm just wondering if there could be that dynamic that's going on with you know, causing the fact that the ADI is not as good a predictor as we would have thought initially. I mean, because I know I remember there were hospitals, they'll remain nameless, but that tended to focus, that may have been in the city, but tended to focus in terms of their marketing efforts and on populations outside of the city to draw that population, which is tended to be a more favorable payer mix. So they would be located in an area of high, you know, deprivation, but their patient population, the actual folks coming to the hospital, may not be representative of the patients that are in the census or the blocks or the groups, whatever you call it, in their immediate service.
Oh, I thought you were saying something else. So on that note, what we are looking at, the ADI distribution of the patients hospitals are receiving, not where they are located.
Okay.
So in that sense, you know, you could see a big difference between Bon Secours, who have almost 70% of their volume coming from most deprived, versus Hopkins and Academic Center drawing a larger population.
Got it. Okay.
But I thought the other issue that could be happening, you know, Baltimore City has a lot of other things going on too, and, you know, there might be some things that we are still not picking up. Maybe we do an analysis excluding Baltimore City and see what happens. It might be that because we have multiple hospitals serving in the same area, there may be some impact to care coordination, and it's increasing their readmission rate across the board, regardless of what the deprivation status is.
So back, you say there may be some implication of care coordination,
right,
or lack thereof?
Yeah, so like if you have, let's say you have the same level of socioeconomic status,
right,
and you have just one hospital serving that community versus 5 hospitals in another community. I mean, I would hypothesize that the readmission rate might be higher in a place where you have 5 hospitals serving the same community, right? That's what I was thinking. That may mask some of this relationship.
Because the 5 hospitals are not as targeted as the one hospital.
No, because you bounce between the hospitals. So in one community, hospital knows you and everything you do, versus in another, 5 hospitals have 5 different views of you.
So I think one of the things that we've always looked at, and it's good to be able to look at not just the absolute readmission rate, and I think this is an argument that we've had for a long time, is we are implementing more observation units, as we are putting all of these efforts in population health and care coordination and pulling the less acute cases out of the hospitals. We've tried to look at this, and we've done it with looking at case mix index to try to figure out, is it that of those remaining patients that truly need that higher level of care of hospitalization, they are the sickest of the sick. And so when you take out the larger group, so you take out the dilutional factor of those observation units, in fact, the readmission rate may go up. And so how do we as a group, start to put pressure? It's like a balloon, right? So we're putting pressure on population health, we're putting pressure on care coordination, and we're teasing out and investing in transportation. So in some of those areas where people may not previously had had access to primary care, to specialty care, to urgent care, now that we have transportation available and we're taking them out of those areas and getting them to their needed care, they're utilizing the hospital services less. So how do we account for the remaining people that truly need to be hospitalized and the readmission rate for that population versus in the past where everyone used the hospital for primary care?
I think that's a good point for consideration. I do want to go back to Bob's comment and also Albert's comment, because one of the things I'm sitting here puzzling about is how the ADI formula is actually used. For instance, when Bob talked about some hospitals may have a broader market, Hopkins really in some ways is very unique, but take some of the other large city hospitals even that may have sort of a bifurcated effort. There may be, for certain specialties, marketing to broader areas, larger circles in the region. But the truth is, our EDs, now I don't know all the statistics in Baltimore region, but most of us have very large percentages through the ED, which tap the immediately local population. So my puzzlement is that I don't know the actual math of the ADI. I understand from the presentations in the past couple of meetings what ADI means, but what I don't see that puzzles me is how this plays out with the math, and if there is some kind of neutralization with the formula used on populations that can be staged, you know, for instance, the marketed specialties versus the ED admissions. So I appreciate, first of all the modeling you are doing. I mean, I think it's amazing, the amount of modeling, the amount of thought that you're putting into this process. I would just say everything has made sense until we get to the ADI. I just can't make sense of it because I know the reality and I know the dollars city hospitals put into programs to prevent readmissions. The other thing is, I know you said we will comment on the overall when we're finished, but at some point I still want to revisit the 9.5.
One more comment, which is sort of inspired by that a little bit. So the Baltimore hospitals are different from the rest of the state in a lot of ways, and one of the things is that the larger hospitals, even the larger hospitals, sort of not in the city per se, tend to get more transferred patients. And I was wondering how that was taken into account, or if it was taken into account because those folks are transferred because not only do they require a higher level of care, but they're often people who had problems, and one became aware that they had a higher level of seems they'd be at a higher risk for readmission.
Yeah, I guess we could take a look at the readmission rate for the transfer in patients. So the transfer itself is not counted as a readmission, but I don't really know if they have a high readmission rate, if, you know, compared to the person who would just go in directly.
Yeah, it seems to me that they've got some unmeasured severity potentially attached to them. I don't know that, you know, I don't know this for sure, but it does seem that that might be the case.
Yeah. So I guess the other kind of coin is just looking at the case mix, right? So if you go back to the model, the case mix index itself is a pretty good predictor. So and as you see, as you add additional ones, the incremental gains are quite minimum. So I think we still need to figure out what's going on, but at the same time, some of these impacts of the socioeconomic conditions are through comorbidities, which are addressed in the case mix index. So I do think that we may be already accounting for a lot of these things through a clinical lens rather than from a social determinants lens.
I wanted to ask also, to what extent, you remember our proposal was to look at the actual, try to identify cohorts of patients that are associated with indigence, as we had done a long time ago in the context of our DISH policy. Had you looked at whether readmission rates vary for categories of patients that are more associated with, you know, lower socioeconomic status, Medicaid secondary payer, I think it's Medicaid secondary payer, is sort of picking up the dual eligible self-pay charity versus everyone else to see if there is a significant difference in readmission rates within those cohorts? Because those are patients actually going, just as you were trying to do with the ADI, I guess, going to individual facilities. And I just don't know whether, I know obviously you've done a lot of analysis, but have you done that?
We have the payer category in the regression, and I don't remember the coefficients. Matt, do you have them in front of you, or can you pull? My recollection was that, Medicaid has higher readmission rates controlling for other things, so that could imply socioeconomic adjustment. The issue is, I think, that we need to think about if you apply yours is the 50-50% mix. That seems to me a random way of doing it. You know what I mean?
No, I'm not talking about the methodology we propose. I'm just talking about you're doing a case mix adjustment.
Yes.
Could you split the case mix adjustment into two categories? One for patients that are, quote, indigent, and one for patients that are not, and then just do the case mix adjustment on a more enhanced basis. Not 50-50, we're talking...
That's not feasible, because then your cell sizes are quite small if you
Well, why couldn't you use 2 years of data then to try to augment?
Why don't you model it and bring it then, Bob? I really cannot do it at this point to do that.
My question was, have you done it?
No, I have not,
okay,
because I don't think it's a good idea.
Okay.
And actually, I'll just jump in here. That kind of analysis was what we were looking at for risk model predictor. So we developed a risk model using a Charlson comorbidity index, and then we also used payer categories. We used some other variables, and then we also did we took out the Charlson comorbidity index and substituted in the norms and did the payer categories. So we've looked at that and then put in some other variables. So we've run a lot of those scenarios. And I think in the end where we've come out is to say of course the payer category is a predictor, but using some of these other models, the norms, we're used to them, and it's transparent, so we know what that looks like. And the models that we were developing don't necessarily predict any better than what we already have. So just to speak to that question.
But at the end, whether you do norm-based or regression, you get the same impact as you see in the base model we are doing with the norms, right? If you do norms, expected rates is one way of doing it. If you put it in a regression and do a regression base, you saw the base comparison in the regression. So when we add the payer, it's the same thing. We did by payer. Yes, they are significant, but it's not impacting the hospital readmission rate at the end of the day significantly. So at the patient level, it is significant, but at the hospital level, it's not impacting their readmission rate. So if you want to do it differently, you know, you can model it, but at the end of the day, no matter what model we put in, the gains and the losses for each hospital is not as significant when you combine with the improvement and attainment. Do you have a comment, Bob?
No, I think it's worthwhile trying to run it.
I'm saying we did it, but we did it through regression,
yeah,
which is easier.
And I don't know enough to know whether that's actually something that's comparable directly. Because on one hand, you're saying that the case mix adjustment is picking up a lot of these things that we need to pick up, like comorbidities. On the other hand, enhancing that case mix adjustment, you say, is not going to gain you anything, yet we haven't run it to determine whether...
We did it through regression, not through expected, and it's the same thing.
Yeah, okay.
You can maybe have the discussion.
On the
Matt,
fact that you
could you use your expertise? People are not believing here on my analysis.
Yes,
maybe I can get another PhD.
I mean, our approach is basically taking a two-stage approach. One was to take the current approach, which is the indirect standardization, and turn it into a regression approach, which facilitates the testing of additional covariates. So when we basically, that baseline model is taking the current approach and turning it into a regression, and then from there, that facilitates the comparison of that model versus all the other models that you see on, I guess it's slide 2 or slide 4, sorry, 4 or 5. And so that's the approach. That makes it more of an apples-to-apples comparison.
We showed them in the last presentation how they were the same in terms of their predictive values. So going back to the 9.5 discussion, maybe we can talk about the benchmarks and this issue around our plan to do further analysis on the risk adjustment.
Since I brought it up, do you want me to?
Yes, please.
I'm talking as a representative of a hospital, not from a mathematical base. I just want to say that, first of all, observing the rate of improvement in Maryland compared to the nation, it's heartening because, as everyone knows, we got a late start in Maryland, and it's good to know that we have really, I think, as a group of hospitals, I can certainly speak for my own system of 3, taken it very seriously and moved just as aggressively as we could. And it does, the complicating variables are population health and all the other things we've had to do in Maryland, and I think particularly in the city-county area, which I represent, we've had to do a great deal. And I think what happens is that as the low-hanging fruit becomes higher and more shriveled and tougher to get at, our rates are slowing down a little bit because, I'm speaking for my own hospital, because the effort is just so consumptive. So I would just like to suggest that it may be that 9.5 is a realistic number. I think doing your modeling, I'd be interested in seeing what it shows, but I would just like to make a case from the hospital perspective that just putting together the CHF clinics, the community-based clinics, the faster care clinics, whatever it may be that helps access to avoid readmissions, that we still need time to see these things take shape. So even though we started with a great rate of reduction, I think it's just harder and harder now. So I would like to appeal for 9.5 and no more at this point, but I understand the need to model.
So Shuli, I think this goes back to the whole question, and we started this discussion maybe 2 years ago about the numerator and the denominator. And as the denominator is shrinking, when we look at those absolute percentages, how do we account for that?
So the expected rates takes care of it because then your denominator is, your expected is applied to your shrinking denominator. And then since it's based on APR, DRG, and severity of the illness level, if you have higher severities, let's say you have more 4s, 0 to 4, 4 is the most severe, then your expected rate will be higher. So at the end, what we are comparing is your readmission rate compared to your expected rate given your patient mix. So I do think that the case mix adjustment will take care of both the denominator issue and then higher need or the risk for the remaining hospitals. The issue is from that number, how much more you can improve is, I think, what Barbara is alluding to, how far you can go down. But Barbara, national average is average, and I don't think we would like to compare ourselves to the average. Yeah.
I do want to clarify. I'm not saying it's a permanent slowdown. I'm saying sometimes you have a bit of a landing just to regroup to make sure that you can make the changes stick that you did employ, and then prepare for the next step of aggressive improvement. I'm just saying we need a little bit of a breather.
Couple of responses. You could see from the data we're right on the cusp of not making that test in 15. We just made it in 14. It seemed, it's going to be hard to say whether the additional focus and the additional increase in the target had any impact. I think it probably did have an impact in improving things from where we had thought we were originally. It just seems like now's the time to keep the pressure on, because of the implications of not meeting these annual targets. So I don't know how you go about the process of deciding, is it 9.6, is it 9.7, but additional pressure is probably warranted at this point. The other question I have or observation is, I'm just curious on this graph where you picked where the attainment benchmark. How do you go about selecting that? I know you just picked the 75th percentile, right?
Yes.
But why that level? I remember when the original staff recommendation, there was some mention of the fact that there were only 2 hospitals in the U.S. that would avoid penalties under the national Medicare program. And even that's
not, no. We said only 2 hospitals is better than the national average.
But then there was some reference, I don't know if this came from someone else on staff, but when you apply the risk adjustment methodology, there were 2 hospitals that without the risk adjustment methodology would avoid penalties. But
not coming from the staff.
Okay. We'll have to go back and trace that. But my general comment is, would one want to look at how we fare relative to where we want the industry to go to on a distribution basis in setting the attainment benchmark, so that you are kind of raising the bar a bit and not potentially diluting the incentive to improve for some of these hospitals that have relatively lower readmission rates in Maryland, which again, by comparison to the U.S., are not as favorable. So I'm just, this is a question, it's not.
Right, so, we discussed what the benchmark should be. It could be a state average, and I think we all kind of said state average, given where we are, is probably not appropriate for a benchmark like this.
Right.
The other alternative was to use national average, and I think in the recommendation you see the calculation, and it's not giving us any aggressive benchmark either with 8% difference.
Yes.
So then staff's kind of approach was to use the quartile using Maryland data, since we don't have any national comparative benchmark to pick a national subquartile. So we think that given what we have, this is the highest benchmark that we could use this year. And if people are working on creating another benchmark, we're happy to hear. Compared to the national, on the hospital-wide measure, only 2 hospitals are statistically significantly better than national average. Again, they are compared to the national average. And when you look at point estimates, which is this, then you have about 10 hospitals that are lower than the national average, but it is not statistically significant. So national estimate, I think in the recommendation, let's see if I included it or not. So if you just use the national average and extrapolate it to our number, it's 12.6%. And the lowest quartile that we are using is at 12.09%. So if you think we need to make it harder, I think then we need to discuss what the methodology and where the data is coming from.
Well, I mean, my sense is that at the end of the day, it's a judgment call where
Right.
you set it.
It's a policy question.
Well, it's a judgment call which turns into a policy question.
Right.
So my question merely was, setting it at this level, does it create less of an incentive for these hospitals in the pink to continue to improve?
So for that, this number may be different for next year. So that's kind of what the issue is here. Also, if we do this concurrently, and if everybody improves, this number could be 12.09 or something better if everybody continues. So I think one way of getting at that is not to fix this number and do it concurrently. Then everybody has incentive to make sure they are remaining in the top quartile.
So unlike a lot of the other methodologies where we set everything in advance, this would not be set in advance. It'd be a function of the distribution, whatever comes out at the end. Okay.
Because they could gain from the improvement. So I think staff said the most current performance here in the recommendation, and what we mean is we get the data, we look at it, and then we look at that top quartile distribution. Would that?
Well, I'm just raising the issue of, generally, let's make sure while we're getting at the issue of attainment, that's great, but that we don't also sort of, avoid or miss our most important target, which is to improve.
Right.
That's what the Medicare agreement is all about. So.
Are you objecting to put the improvement? I mean, is that where this is going?
No, I'm just trying to figure out what's the best level to put attainment at this stage.
And if you have other number and methodology.
Yeah, we may. I don't know. We just have to think of this. This is the first time we've seen it, and it seems like it's time to keep.
This is the time to discuss. I think, as you know, the timelines are. Dr. Butt had some methodology that you mentioned before.
Yeah, there is a methodology called the Achievable Benchmark of Care. I think it's originally developed by the University of Alabama for mostly process measures, but I don't see why it couldn't be adapted to this. And what it tries to do is when you're trying to get to benchmarks that are based on quartiles or especially the top deciles, because CMS is even going for that in some of their bonuses, like the physician bonuses are based on really very high achievers.
Right.
So there you get into the sort of methodologically the sampling problems of picking people who are not representative. So I think the way they try to do it is they try to sort of base it on the number of patients that account for that percentage as opposed to the individual institution or the entity. So that ensures a certain minimum number of cases have gotten into that quartile or the decile for that calculation. And so that's really the difference, because you're doing in the straight percentile, you're just picking up the institution, and they may not be representative. The top, let's say the top 4 or 5 may not be representative in their case mix. So what it tries to do is takes the percentage of the cases
Yeah, that's what we do on the MHAC benchmarking. I think it's kind of similar. We could try to model and see what percentage of cases we're picking up with this threshold and see if it is
I think it
smaller
tries
not.
to make sure that enough percentage of cases are in that pool to achieve the 10% or the 75th percentile. The question I have is how many hospitals currently are meeting the 12.09 threshold in Maryland?
So 12, 10.
10 to 12. So I mean, that still means that the majority of them have an incentive to improve, and so you can always adjust. I just think it's always a good idea to give them a number as opposed to tell them that in retrospect you just tell them whether they made it into the quartile or not. So generally speaking, if you have enough people that are in that group that have to improve to get to a smaller number, then I think you will be pushing them in that direction. But as everybody gets closer to that attainment, you can always bump it up to a higher level.
Actually, so there are 10 hospitals who are better, and then 5 of them improved. Actually, yes, 5 of them improved and 5 didn't. 50-50, flip a coin.
So you're modeling it off of the previous year now? Is that what?
No, I'm just looking at the appendix in the recommendation. So you could see 10 hospitals who are getting positive adjustment for attainment, and then when you look at their improvement scaling, you could see their improvement rate. So 5 of them improved, 5 didn't.
We don't have that.
We didn't print them, but they were sent out.
So
it was modeling what if we applied this to rate year 17, what the results would be.
Because I think it's like you could make it 11. It's not going to change the dynamics because you'll only have 10 people that may try to get to the 11. The bulk of them still have to get to 12 first before they get to 11. So I think you're kind of pushing them in the right direction. The bulk of them are being given a target that hopefully is achievable, and then you can always raise the benchmark.
Right. We could, if we are kind of modeling 9.5 overall improvement, we could improve or reduce this by that percentage too, prospectively. So that will help.
That's another factor that you have to see what level of improvement you would need to do there.
Any other comments? Everybody's comfortable finalizing it in June, or do you think there are other things we need to discuss?
I think you're out of time, just in terms of getting it.
Yeah, I think the clock is
through the year. We're halfway through the performance.
Maybe this was a rhetorical question. if that's the answer.
For this year, the risk adjustment would essentially stay the same.
Yes, I think so.
And I'll say it this way, I think we've made a huge amount of progress in the last couple of months and made the policy substantially more balanced. And while we can continue to tweak different pieces, I think that we're at a good place for this year.
The other thing is to maybe collaborate a little bit, or at least touch base with Helen Burston at the NQF, because they are almost in their second year of the the socio-demographic adjustment pilot that CMS has asked them to do. And they have a whole expert panel looking specifically at some of these issues. It'd be interesting to see and share with them actually this experience and the studies that we have done, because it may be of great interest to them.
Good idea.
I think that's a great suggestion. I just wouldn't want it to hold up our decision now. Because
you're talking about for next year.
Yeah,
right.
All of that is...
right. We are not stopping. I think there are still, we need to work on it. Yeah.
Right. And I also just want to emphasize our thanks to you, because the amount of modeling, the amount of investment in the progress that we've made is just amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So we will go back on our slide deck. So the second policy that we are working towards finalizing in June is the PAU savings policy. So we, as you know, it was called shared savings, and based on the comments from the payment work group, to make it more understandable, we changed the name to PAU savings. As you know, shared savings has a different meaning in the payment world now, and when we started there, I don't think there was any shared savings policy back then, 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago.
My recollection is this kind of grew out of the lockbox concept, and so shared savings may have been kind of a way of capturing that idea. So, but whatever, a name, what's in a name?
Right. So when we started, this was kind of back to 2014, before the all-payer model, when we had the episode-based payment where hospitals were incentivized to reduce readmissions and would keep 100% of the revenue associated with reductions in readmissions. We had to maintain our exemption from the hospital readmission reduction program, CMS, and have some savings to the payers. So with that, we've been creating a statewide savings from the readmission measure, and it was at 0.2% of total revenue each year, to reduce and pass some of the savings from episode-based and then turn into global budgets to the payers. So last year, the Commission discussed to expand the measurement from readmissions to PAUs, and if you remember, since we were concerned with the readmission trend, Commission decided to keep it at the readmission measure level because we wanted to have more incentives targeted on readmission reductions. So the incentive program is one way of doing it, and the shared savings is the other way, where hospitals receive cuts based on their overall readmission rate. And since we changed the readmission from readmission to your hospital to readmission anywhere, we introduced a cap for reduction, so we protected hospitals based on their percent of Medicaid discharges, so that hospitals who were at the top quartile receive the average reduction rather than the high reduction that they will be subject to. So we already are making some assumption on the impact of the Medicaid or socioeconomic factors using the Medicaid as an indicator. So this year, the staff has looked at the prevention quality indicators and proposing to align now the savings adjustments to the PU completely, and that will entail adding the PQIs into the measure and changing the readmissions from index hospital to a receiving hospital. We discussed this briefly in the last meeting. So if you have a global budget and any reductions in your own admissions are savings under your global budget, that includes readmissions coming from another hospital. So the global budget incentivized to reduce avoidable utilization at your hospital, no matter where they are coming from. So PQIs are coming from ambulatory issues around ambulatory services, and readmissions are coming from issues around inpatient hospitals. But at the end, it's the receiving hospital who is saving and working on reducing those potential avoidable utilization. So with that, we are going to also handle this observation issue because in the market shift algorithm, we already include observation cases 23 or more hours into our account. So this way, we will reconcile, and the inpatient readmission measure becomes inpatient and observation readmission measure. And what you have here in the slide is the trends. So what you have in the red is the readmission Cmmi change from 2013. And in 14, we had 3.6% reduction, and cumulatively in 2015, the reduction is at 5%. When we look at the PQIs, we had a reduction of 1.3% in 14, but 15 increases captured that reduction, and overall now we have about 1% increase in the PQIs. So we think that equal attention also needs to be placed in the PQI in thinking about the avoidable utilization under global budgets. So this is the draft recommendations as a list. In addition to changing the measures, staff is also proposing to increase the amount of revenue that is reduced in the savings program. So as I mentioned, historically we were using 0.2% total revenue. So as a net impact, that's now going to be increased to 0.65% of the revenue. Staff has considered the investments that we put in place in the first 3 years, and we think that the amount needs to be increased to recoup some of those savings, and also, as I mentioned, increase the incentives around reducing potential avoidable utilization. And for future, for next year, we would like to look at other measures to expand the PAU more than PQIs and the readmissions. So in terms of the technical aspect of how we are doing it, there were some questions on the denominator issue. So this table is giving the statewide numbers on page 20. So statewide total approved permanent revenue is about 15.2 billion. I should have the zeros there. And then the net PAU savings amount is at 0.65%, which is about 100 million reduction in the state revenue. And when we look at the state percent PAU, we have 12% of revenue in PAUs, which is equal to 1.8 million. So with that, the reduction required to make up that 100 million is 5.4% reduction in PAU revenue. So for a hospital, the way that it will work is if hospital has a 5 million revenue and 4 million of it is in PAUs, which is about 8% of their revenue, we will apply the 5.42% reduction to 40 million, and that will get us the 2.1 million reduction for that hospital. So overall, that will be equal to the 0.43% of their total revenue. So if you think about it, this hospital has 8% PAU compared to the state average of 12%. So their net reduction is lower than the average of 0.65 with 0.43%. Do you want me to walk through one more time?
I just have a question.
Mm-hmm.
The formula for PAU reduction to get to 5.42.
Yep.
It says C over D. The 98.9 million over.
Sorry.
1.99.
So yeah, I had to rearrange. Let me just go back and give you the correct formula.
So I know how to, the 5.42.
Right. So it's the C over D. That's C over. Wait. So E is total PAU.
Right.
So it's C over E, not D.
Okay. And so the 1.8 is kind of like the average amount that would be PAUs, because the 11.99 is the statewide average.
Right. It's 180 million, right? Isn't that?
Is it 180 million?
I think so.
Well,
sorry, I messed up.
Right. I think it's right. 11.99 times
15 billion?
Well, no. Aren't you
15 billion.
Oh, okay.
I missed the zeros.
Okay,
I was trying to make it easy to get the round numbers,
I was
but
just trying to see how the math.
right.
I get it now. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should just keep them as original. Personally, I'm not good at rounding.
And the PAU savings dollars, it's GBR money that's going back to the payer?
Yes. Okay. Because it is flowing into the update factor, and then that's a line item there to reduce the update factor, the net impact. Purchasers, I guess, is the better term.
So is the right, if I were to say this 5.42% in words rather than looking at the calculation, is what you're saying here that the current statewide PAU percent is 11.99, and so we'll reduce that 11.99 by 5.5%.
Yes.
So another way, I mean,
it's similar to your calculation. Then when you add the variable cost factor on top of it, it is 10% required reduction. If you're thinking from the hospital perspective.
Yeah, I still come up. I brought.
You use the 1.25. Yeah. Why don't you share yours? I think it's the same calculation. It's just we are looking at a net reduction, and I think you're looking at a total reduction.
So we wanted to get a sense of what that 1.25% meant in terms of reducing the volume of cases, the volume of PQIs and readmissions. So what we said was the 1.25% is $190.6 million. And then if you add the variable cost of those complications on, if you assume that costs are variable at 50%, then for a hospital to begin to break even on that reduction, they'd need to reduce the PQIs and readmissions by twice that amount. So then that's a $381.2 million reduction. So then going down to the chart at the bottom, if we look at the last line, the combined line, the average charge for PQIs and readmissions together in 2015 was $13,961. And to achieve that $381.2 million in savings, hospitals would, as a whole, would need to reduce the number of cases by 27,305. And then the total number of cases is 124,499. So 27 divided by 124 is a reduction of about 22%. So that was how we did our calculation there.
Mm-hmm. The 124,000, it's the total PAUs, right? Not overall.
124,499 is the total number of PQIs and readmissions added together, but not duplicative.
So just from like back of the envelope, you're starting with 1.25%, which is the total number, and what we have is the net impact of 0.65, right? So that will reduce your number by half to 10%. And what you have is the variable cost factor that you're adding, so that then our numbers tie up to overall 5% reduction observed. What you're seeing is hospitals, to make that, they have to do it twice.
Got it. So I think that variable cost is important, because if what we're saying when we're in this policy is that this is a savings policy and that hospitals can then break even once they surpass the savings benchmark, then we do have to include that concept of the variable cost.
Right. So.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think Donna made the comment. So if you include the variable cost factor, so you have to reduce it in one. So if I take my net impact and add the 50%, right? So it's confusing with same number, 1.2%. So overall in the global budget, the staff's comment was 1.2% reduction overall is not that big of a number if you think about all the other avoidable utilization that we are not capturing. And it's the third year of the model.
Yeah, and if I could just make a comment to build on that, I think this is the way I've looked at it. More, maybe it's not accurate the way you're thinking about it, but this is in a way a program to create incentives, additional incentives for hospitals to reduce avoidable utilization. They could be PAUs, but they could be other things at the hospital under the global budget that are avoidable and could be prevented. Whether they're reducing PAUs or these other categories of excess utilization, it really doesn't matter. If they're doing that, they can earn back the 1.25. And that's the beauty of the global budgets. They give you, the hospitals, a cap to reduce PAUs or other forms of avoidable utilization, and then earn back those offsets that are taken off at the beginning of the year. And so I think that maybe it's a misconception that they have to be PAUs that are reduced. They don't. There's a lot of additional excess utilization. It's been well documented in the literature. We probably arguably have higher levels of it than the rest of the United States. So this is an opportunity an additional incentive to go after those. And the PAUs are more or less being used as being indicative of perhaps other avoidable utilization at the hospital that are opportunities for reduction. That's the way I would look at it.
So Bob, I agree with the first part of what you were saying, that this 1.25% reduction, hospitals can, by reducing utilization, get the gains beyond that, no matter where it is in the hospital. It doesn't have to be in a readmission or a PQI. Can come from anywhere. But so to me, that makes the broader point that this reduction belongs more in the annual update discussion rather than in the discussion of is this PAU or PQI. It's intended as another way to reduce revenue in the system. So that discussion is happening in the context of the annual update. And so to me, that's where this discussion belongs, is in that context. So one more point about this is that because this number is so high, this 1.25%, it was 0.6 last year, so it's up to quite a bit for this year, and the methodology is different than last year. So even though we add back the 0.6 from last year, how that's distributed is very different across hospitals. So if a hospital is getting a relatively small amount added back from fiscal 16, but getting a bigger reduction in 17, they could see a very big reduction on this policy for this year. So again, putting that comment in the context of the annual update, which is also very low this year, this change in policy is kind of unexpected, so it was not built into hospitals' budgets. It's coming late in the year to have this big shift in how the dollars are distributed, so it's something that's very hard to manage to hospitals. So just to put those, I hope those comments all sort of hang together, that it's more of it's perceived by us as more of a revenue reduction and being spread unequally across hospitals, unexpected, hard to plan for.
So I think we've been talking about PAUs since the beginning of the model. We've been talking about incentives to reduce it. So this is not new. What we've been seeing is that the improvement in the PQI is not going anywhere, and this is a way for us. Reduction it's the update factor discussion. As you know, it relates to how much money, and there too, I think there is not that big of a surprise. The number is low this year compared to last year. But in terms of you're right, we are doing a differential adjustment because we think that the hospitals have differential opportunity to save. The reason we are discussing is whether the PAU, what other measures we want to include in the PAU, but I don't think that we could spread it like butter across all the hospitals at this point and expect everyone to have this equal savings. I do think that if you, actually it's in the slide 22, we could take a look at the impact of the PAU savings. So if you look at column E on slide 22, so we showed both the total PAU 1.25 and also the net PAU column E. And the maximum penalty one hospital is receiving as a net is 3.5% of their inpatient revenue, which is the second row. And you convert that to a total, half of it, so it's about 1.7% of their total revenue. So, and then there is that limit. So this is going to hit the limit of the protection on the aggregate policy of 3.5%. So we are watching that limit, and if any hospital hits that protection, we will do adjustments. But in general, I think this shouldn't be a surprise to the industry if they are thinking PAU is a new kind of incentive that we are trying to push.
Yeah. So I know PQIs have been coming down the pike because we've been getting reports on those, which has been very helpful. The 1.7% here that we were just talking about as one hospital getting that maximum penalty, I want to put that in the context of the inflation portion of the annual update, which is around 1.7%. So we're saying then that that hospital would get nothing. And then if that hospital happens to have negative adjustments on the balance of the other quality programs, they could be seeing a global budget reduction from 17 to 18, 16 to 17, that is.
Yeah, we are trying to calculate all to see how much hospital is going to get from market shift, demographic, and the net impact on this. You know, I think the maximum penalty right now is in Dorchester, which has the highest PAU %, and I haven't looked at their trend, how much reduction they did. But I think if we are saying that we are going to do value-based purchasing and payment, you know, I think then hospital needs to feel the burden of all those measurements. I think the more protections we put, then we are diluting the incentives we are trying to put in. Any other comments on the PAU concept?
Yeah, I think that it's Albert. I mean, I think that I agree that sort of what is PAU is going to be something that you know, ultimately is really important to the hospitals. And you know, I don't know what the best way would be to try to get that, you know, get some consensus about that or opinions about that from the various hospitals. Theoretically, they should know what of the things that are, you know, potentially PAU, which of the things are things that they really believe that they can and should reduce.
Good question.
Just, but also on that, I mean, there's a lot of literature on Iran, Dartmouth have done studies on this. Why not tap into that as what's potentially avoidable? I mean, you started to do that with the Prometheus. So there's sources out there that you know, people that have looked at this. You know, it's good to check with the industry, obviously, as well, to see what their thoughts are. But I think there's a lot of information.
I think it segues too into the strategic discussion we want to have in a minute. But I don't have any data tables. I'll just apologize ahead of time.
So the last and the topic that we have in terms of the...
Can I bring up one more,
yep,
but much smaller issue related to this shared savings policy, and that's the changing the definition of the readmission that's included from what we've been used to, what's in the market shift, and what we've been seeing in the reports. I understand the rationale that this policy is about the global budget, so you want to count the readmissions that come to that one particular hospital. I think I also heard someone say that part of that rationale is that by measuring just the readmissions that come to one hospital, it's sort of an incentive for hospitals to collaborate. So I do think it's important for hospitals to collaborate. I think that incentive maybe doesn't meet that mark. It just confuses the definition and is not something that is that a hospital can immediately act upon. So if someone is presenting to the hospital and that person happens to say, oh, 2 weeks ago I was at this other hospital, and now I'm here. I'm not sure that I understand there being the importance of having an incentive to work together, but I don't know that it's something that hospital can actually act upon at that point. And I think by making the definition for this policy different than it is for the other two policies, and different from the data reports, is hard.
So actually, we think this is easier than before. So in the readmission reduction reports you are getting, it's inpatient only and index, right? So you're getting your readmission rate as a hospital, and then you can look at where the patients are readmitted, and for what condition. In the market shift adjustments, we already are giving you the readmissions happening at your hospital, because that's the exclusion we have, that you've been already tracking that number, which is different than the incentive program. and also it includes the observation stay. So those two numbers that hospitals been receiving in the last 2 years are different. And I've been in every place I went to, I've been trying to get people to call inpatient readmission and the PAU readmission as a separate definition. I do think the hospitals have tools through CRISP that they are receiving notifications, and my understanding is both the index hospital and the receiving hospital know when the patient presents that they had a prior admission, and it's a readmission happening at that point. So I do think that hospitals have tools to start thinking about these and then look at it more holistically from both hospitals. And you're right, at the point where the patient presents, probably it's too late, but all the ideas about PAUs is to do this prospectively, right, doing planning and understanding why patients are readmitted as a whole. So I do hope that it will make it easier rather than more complicated, because in the old PAU definitions, we had to have a logic to assign all the readmissions back to the sending hospital. We carried the charges with it. I think it was much more complicated.
So I just want to make sure I got this right. So I think we're clear on the readmissions definition as it relates to the policy we talked about first, the readmission reduction and the improvement in that one. We're clear on that. It's inpatient only, and it's any readmissions that happen anywhere within Maryland. On the summary of care reports, the measures that include PQIs, readmissions, they've had MHACs. Now for this year, we're talking about taking the MHACs out. That one is observation, but the same kinds of readmissions that happen anywhere.
Right.
Are we saying that we would, and that definition is used for the market shift?
So then you have a third report, market shift, and there you were looking at readmissions happening at your hospital as receiving. So you have 3 readmission numbers that you are receiving. One is inpatient in the improvement, one was in summary care PAU report, and the third was in market shift. So those 3 numbers never matched each other. So you had 3 different lines that you were following. Okay. So with this, now we are saying let's make the PAU one and the market shift the same. So then you have 2 readmission numbers you're following. One is inpatient as your index, and the other one is PAU as you hospital, as receiving hospital, including observation cases.
Okay, so I'm mistaken. I thought that the market shift and the PAU, the summary of care, had already been harmonized to be the same, but that's not.
So if you think about the market shift, we said if the hospital is reducing their readmissions, we don't want to reduce and give market shift to a hospital that has an increase in readmissions. But that is for their actual service line happening. So we cannot, because index is happening no matter what, right? So index is part of the service line. The issue was the reductions in readmissions and protect hospitals from declines in the readmission itself rather than index. So there was always this difference between the 2 reports.
Okay. I'm glad.
No.
Thank you for the clarification.
Any other questions on, maybe we'll put an appendix in the draft. So the aggregates, so we already kind of looked at the year-to-date results. So this doesn't include the proposed changes to the readmission policy. What you have here is the MHAC with 28.9 million total net adjustments, and the readmission reduction is at 27.8 million. And then the QBR, the modeling right now is giving us a positive of 28 million. And then you see the PAU savings, both the aggregate, which we use for CMS calculations, and the net, which is important for the hospitals. We are still working on the demographic adjustment. reductions for the PAU there. So on aggregate, the number is at 16.9 million net impact with 0.46% of total revenue in the state. And the hospital net impact, as I mentioned earlier, the maximum penalty one hospital is receiving now is at 3.1% of their inpatient revenue, and one hospital is receiving 1.4% positive adjustment. And on average, the average adjustment is at 1.35% of hospital inpatient revenue. So since the major changes are in the savings policy, the staff proposal is to keep the levels the same for the remaining policies. We had already discussed the QBR back in September or October. So this is going to just confirm the 2% maximum penalty. And the MHAC is at 3% if we don't reach the target and 1% if we do, and the readmission reduction is at 2%. And a technical note here, staff is planning to apply some of these adjustments to the inpatient revenue centers to align it with the Medicare, and rate setting, we'll be discussing that with the technical work group to kind of get the, if it's approved, to get the detail on it. All right, any questions on the aggregate? So the plan is we are hoping to have the final calculations for the to be included in the final draft recommendation. So these numbers will change slightly, and if there are major changes, we'll allude it to before we post the final recommendations. Especially maybe QBR may change. I'm not so sure yet. All right, with that, now we have half an hour for the next phase.
Yes. So I think I'll try to introduce the discussion and then, but really this is about us having a discussion together about how we want to move forward in really refining and making our program for performance measurement that really does transform and makes Maryland a model and is that can be replicated in other places. So I think we do share, we want a patient-centered, high-quality care environment that is delivered efficiently, and that is actually CMS's articulated ideal. So in their roadmap, and I don't think anyone would argue with that. It's just sort of what goes into that is what we want to talk about. And we're you know, there's a balance with providing a framework and being sort of assertive about that versus really being very open to how we should proceed. And I think to the extent that it's helpful, we want to provide this framework and some ideas and maybe some sketch of a straw man or a paradigm so that we could have something to respond to and move forward. So, and this is a little risky because it's this, the CMS measure list that's outlined in the proposed rule this year. The Indiana Hospital Association did it, so I stole it. Actually, Nicole from MHA sent it to me, but so it made me not have to do this. So I'm very excited about it. But this outlines this roadmap from 18 all the way through 22 on measures. But what I don't want it to happen is for us to get mired in the measures. So I'll pass that out with the caveat so that we can stay focused on the big picture, though, and sort of have this as a reference, and if, to the extent we want to refer to it to inform that higher level discussion. Oh, I have one already. So in having this conversation, we really do need to think about our current performance measurement program, the incentives that we want to continue to support, the improvements that we want to push, but at the same time, we have sort of a structure and we have these several independent programs. How is it that we could move forward perhaps to make a program that's more that's more unified and more purposeful and sort of comes together to really better transform the system. So there's a balance between sticking with the old and making something all new or partially new, and then having a roadmap to get to the most ideal. So so with that, we will be calling for white papers to address some ideas and concepts that some of them are sketched here. So we've just talked about potentially avoidable utilization. Shule talked about that in terms of our policy. One of the areas, for instance, that CMS has identified in their measurement roster is they looked at a measure that I knew about like 25 years ago, which is length of stay, excessive to what is usual or average for particular conditions. So that is an idea that I think is pretty fertile for possibility. And along those lines, it fits into, so these categories on this slide are not mutually exclusive. So as we think about, for instance, the service line, what conditions are amenable to thinking about an episode unit, if you will, or a package of measures that really tell a much better story about how that care is delivered for that patient. So it's much more patient-centric at its core. And there are some conditions that are amenable to this and some that are not. CMS has started on the joint arthritis and joint replacement condition area, and there are excess of 52 measures, for instance, in what in CMS's STAR methodology that they're now starting to publish on joint replacement. But there are several other conditions when you look at this measure list that you'll see that they have focused on one's specific conditions. Beyond that, though, there are condition-independent measures that we also very much need to think about. And this goes to people that have multiple chronic conditions and comorbidities and who are the highest need. So to that end, we do need to think about care transition, care coordination, and CMS also identifies end-of-life, palliative care, advanced directives, medication reconciliation, and some others in their list. So we need to move beyond the settings of hospital, outside the inpatient walls. That's why we have here emergency department, outpatient, and then certainly imaging, duplicate imaging measures gets at this efficiency notion. And then CMS identifies prevention as one of their areas of focus, but I think here we would want to think a little more broadly in terms of really supporting population health in how our care delivery system moves forward. And then across all these, CMS has a goal of leveraging the tools that are out there. Health information technology, of course, is our tool most recognized and under development, and Dr. Butt can talk to some of that. And then regarding the conditions, CMS's usual suspects are for the Medicare population. So I think we really do need to think outside of those boundaries, definitely in terms of care delivery, for instance, or psychiatric patient care episodes, seeing that we do include psych patients in our data, and that is not something that CMS has had a focus on. And along those lines, we have started to collect at least a year, maybe 2 years ago, things that the Joint Commission collects, for instance, restraint and seclusion timing, and I think we collect medication paneling where patients are made to take medications because those are sentinel events that are indicative of other care quality issues. So with those comments, I'll ask for my colleagues to add anything that I did not articulate well, and then we can start our conversation. So, yes, I'll be quiet. So did we miss a big glaring hole in this list, I guess?
Yes.
Okay, so perfect.
So I think if you look at the proposed rule that is affecting the performance period calendar year 2017, and that'd be the fiscal year 2019 for adjustment, they're proposing 15 ECQMs, electronic quality measures, as mandatory, and only 4 chart abstracted measures. Only 4 charted. Yeah. So in the grid here, we're seeing only voluntary ECQMs referenced for fiscal year 2018, which would mean that the voluntary period of the performance being fiscal year calendar year 2016. So that's not what the proposed rule is.
Right. So I think this was the Indiana Hospital Association's take on what was in the rule, and I think that they were using it for a very pragmatic purpose. But I think the disclaimer is there could be some oversights in there. Yeah.
I think the general thrust of the proposed rule is to eliminate a lot of the process measures, both from the voluntary ECQM measures that are in effect for the performance year 2016. And so my sort of suggestion would be that if you develop a grid similar to this, that it should clearly lay out the performance year as a calendar year 2017, if we're focusing on the proposed rule, and then a fiscal year of 2019, because a lot of times people are not able to make that sort of assumption, because if we're going to go into this performance-driven reimbursement, then the most important time period for these hospitals, or physicians even, is the performance period, because they have to be ready January 1, 2017 for their payment adjustment in fiscal year 2019. And that should be as clearly stated, because once the performance period, especially for electronic quality measures, once you have missed the window, because the documentation in those happens as care is being delivered. It's not like an abstractor going back a year from previous quarters and abstracting data. It's really all the documentation. So if you missed your window, you're going to miss the window. So
can I ask you if you had to assess the state of affairs nationally, and or if you have knowledge of Maryland-specific sort of performance, how we stand on the hospitals complying with them for calendar 17 performance?
Yeah, so that's kind of an interesting question, because that's the $64,000 question, and a lot of for this year, they are mandating 4 electronic quality measures to be reported electronically, and their proposal for next year performance period is to increase it to 15. And already in my conversations with the AHA and other folks, there seems to be a lot of nervousness and some pushback, et cetera. We've been discussing this at the HIMSS level, at the Joint Commission level. In the proposed rule, what CMS is saying that 95% of hospitals have attested in meaningful use that they have implemented these measures. And this is the 5th year of that. And they're saying, at what point should it be that you're going to submit this data to us?
Yeah, show us the proof.
And so everybody is saying, well, CMS needs to do better analytics. And they say, well, we don't have any way to do analytics unless we have the data. So this is the chicken or the egg argument that's going on. So at least the flexibility that they're showing, at least in this next cycle, is that they're saying the data will not be used for performance based reimbursement calculations from these ECQMs, and that it will not be displayed publicly on the inpatient side. On the physician side, they are intending to use this data for public display and for the physician reimbursement formulas. So I think at some point that should be sort of included into the mix, because some of this is going to happen at some point.
Okay. So along these lines, we're going to call for white papers similar to prior to the beginning of the new model, and so we really want to frame the request for those white papers inclusively and broadly, so that we don't miss an opportunity to have great ideas among the ones that we have kind of identified. So, and those will be sort of big picture ideas, as well as if there has been analytics and or that have implications for policy, we will ask for those ideas. So look forward to that. And I know these discussions are difficult sort of on a dime, so we just wanted to put things forward here so that I think we also need to very much think about how we phase into this new realm of something much more globally supporting transformation in care, that's much more episode-based, that's much more patient-centric. It doesn't look like what we have now, but we can't get there from here without some incremental steps, we think. So ideas along those lines as well, I think, will be very useful.
What about, in addition to the white papers, what about a little, competition of some sort, inviting people to submit ideas for conditions to bundle or quality targets, quality measures, and those that ultimately get implemented would win some little sort of award?
Well, I could bake a cake.
So,
I'm a really good cook.
I think that might be a good idea, but I think we were hoping first to have more conceptual papers to guide us in terms of the narrowing down some of our, maybe create a roadmap for us. And once we have that, I think that might be a good idea to kind of get the specifics through some kind of other process than what we usually do.
This was not an or.
Yeah. This is not or. And,
okay.
Tracy and.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask some more details about the white papers and timing. That's a very basic question, but I also want to ask, what kind of time frame are you looking for the white papers to address? Are we looking to address calendar 17 measurement? Are we looking out further than that? Are we assuming that we are operating under the current demonstration or a revised demonstration? Those kinds of things I think will influence. Some of them are hard to answer, but those kinds of questions will influence what those concepts look like.
We'll get to it before. Let's hear Dr. Butt.
So one of the areas where actually both in the MIPS macro proposed rule for the physicians and the IPPS would be around the PQIs is a very good set of measures where you can have hospital physician alignment because they're both on the hook. And that's one of the deficiencies in hospitals trying to influence physicians by themselves currently. And this is a good approach for them to show to the physicians that, hey, it's impacting your payment as well. So this may be an opportunity for us to work together.
Well, I think the CMS roadmap also identifies things like, actual patient outcomes that are very much measured and influenced by physician care that are not necessarily in the hospital, that is not delivered, I should say, in the hospital. And then it also is pushing for that collaboration. And then there's this whole notion of how do you measure a patient in terms of a picture like that, in the hospital for CHF or for another condition, then receiving care in the outpatient setting, and then how efficient was that care delivered at the end of the day.
So I just had a question. Where does long-term care fit into all this? Because they're certainly readmitting to hospitals, and are they going to be part of the look at kind of population health? Because right now there's no penalties that I'm aware of for long-term care.
Right. Well, currently our levers do not exist in the long-term care arena. However, we know that patients are moving from long-term care to acute care settings. So there has to be incentives that are better at supporting care coordination and collaboration among partners. And perhaps this is around a condition-specific idea, or perhaps it's, lots of patient who's very complex, but there are things that rise above just, a condition, and they're not dependent on the condition, like the care planning and coordination. And I'm not maybe smart enough to think about how the long-term care, how you actually, within our system as we sit right now, influence directly the care delivered at a long-term care facility, for instance.
Well, I think right now, as you know, the process for planning for the phase 2 is ongoing, and Advisory Council has representation from both post-acute hospital physicians, and we'll see how that process goes, but there are kind of ideas emerging in terms of linking some of the payments with post-acute, and the quality measurement is kind of part of that discussions going on. So I do think, related to Tracy's question, what about the next phase of the model, is right at the center of what you're saying. Chad had a question.
I just wanted to reinforce Dr. Butt's comment that we should look at physician-hospital alignment. CMS has put out in the macro rule as a part of that sort of a measure development plan where there's going to be an annual call for measures. And so it's going to, with each performance here, there's going to be a call for measures, probably sort of some white papers coming with that, so we could probably sort of grab from that and potentially do some alignment with pulling out measures. We should probably be extracting from there.
Mm-hmm.
I think sort of dovetailing with that is the NQF's Measures Incubator project, where they are actually interested in people bringing in some innovative measures that CMS or other folks can pick up. So I think they have put me on one of those work groups as well, so I might be able to connect if there is interest in developing these types of new measures. But on the long-term care, I think their reporting and performance measurement is also changing quite a bit. CMS is now bringing them in alignment with the hospital type of performance measurement reporting, as opposed to the old OSS, MDS type of reporting.
Right. I think infections, for instance, is a huge area of alignment across, and it's important across all settings, and very impactful.
So along the lines of these really good suggestions about where to find measures and to align, as far as a roadmap goes, the IOM put out a report, I think it was March 2015. I can't remember the name of it, but it's along the lines of their Crossing the Quality Chasm. It's another one that laid out a roadmap for population health measurement. They didn't specify particular measures, but it was they had more high-level recommendations, about 15 of them, and I couldn't.
Is that vital signs?
Yes.
Vital signs, core metrics.
Thank you.
So I think, there are kind of immediate needs and also the long-term discussions. We kind of need to figure out what the balance is for this coming white paper discussion. So, our immediate concern, as we are short-sighted usually, what we do for the calendar year 17 time period. We collected a lot of input during these annual updates in terms of our programs being similar yet different. We have 3 programs, and they have nuances. At the end, they may be places where we could merge them. We heard about the MHAT program, whether it will make sense to move towards more service line specific measurement that may impact readmissions. So I think, what is your sense in terms of the structure of the white paper? It might be some of the general ideas could be good to put on paper, think about it, but some of them could be concrete that would need to be applied in the 2017. So we could make it narrower and just say for next year, given where we are, and then wait for the phase 2 process to evolve a little bit and have a broader discussion after the application is submitted in December. What is your sense where we are right now? That how far should we take this process?
So we've done a little bit of thinking about that very question in light of this, all the discussions about a second phase of the waiver. And where we've come out is to say the measurement piece should kind of be like the last piece of the puzzle that gets fitted into a waiver application, that it would make sense to have a better idea of what exactly we're shooting for in terms of structures, in terms of how different stakeholders work together, and what those models would be, before we then lay on top of that what the performance metrics would be. I think it's clear to us, and I think there wouldn't be a lot of disagreement with this, that there should be measures that cut across different stakeholder types, like the physician metrics that we mentioned, where the hospitals and physicians are pulling in the same direction, hospitals and long-term care or other kinds of post-acute are pulling in the same direction. I don't know exactly what those are yet, but that piece is we would definitely want those. But before we can really engage in a meaningful discussion of that piece, we need to flesh out that application a little further. But I think that doesn't preclude us from looking at the big picture on all stakeholders and all stakeholder alignment.
I think from my perspective, I mean, there's a lot of information that gets put out by CMS and their learning networks and other entities that then sort of do. But the deficiency in all of that guidance is usually, how does it apply to Maryland, and how does Maryland deviate, if it does, to some extent in the actual measurement, and where it aligns, and how it sort of performs within the constraints or the whole concept of the waiver requirements. So I think anything that provides concrete guidance to those type of connecting the dots, I think, would be very helpful. Because just reproducing what CMS does or something is of less relevance, or would be important, but probably not as value added as something that's applicable to Maryland in context of what the proposed rule says or what the final rule says when it does come out, how it aligns or deviates from the Maryland specific programs.
I was just going to suggest that the primary focus of the white papers be the more here and now, but also give the people that would be submitting these the option of trying to put it in the context of something broader, larger phase 2 beyond just hospitals, if it can be put in that context, or submit a paper just more generally about direction. But the primary focus of the white paper should probably be kind of here and now, and then solicit ideas about the broader context. Would just be my suggestion.
Yeah, I think here and now, Albert, maybe we can collaborate on you to disseminate it widely and see if there are other interested parties who could help us. So, I mean, if we do here and now, like my immediate question is for calendar year 2017, are we going to do a service line and measure PPCs, readmissions in a similar format? Are we adding this, we could do some more work on socioeconomic adjustment, improvement versus we could list the things that the staff is interested in getting input in terms of questions, and leave it up to the writers to pick a topic if they are interested in only single, or give us answers to all. Is that?
Yeah, I think give some direction and focus, so you just don't get a broad set of papers. But at the same time, I mean, that would be the best. But give some flexibility within any given topic for people to respond. But I think if you were to identify, look, we're thinking about service line specific and MHACs, we're thinking about this. Please in your comments address this plus whatever else you might want to suggest in a given domain of quality.
So in terms of maybe we need to think about goals of this revisions and the process, what we are trying to achieve. We said patient centricity. I think the across provider relationships, getting some common set is another one. I heard you guys described. There was the simplicity or the straightforwardness is kind of also what we heard from the commissioners in the past. So it might be helpful if you think between now and we'll talk about the timelines. If you can give us the goals of this process, what we are trying to achieve with our performance programs with this revision, that will be helpful for us to frame the white paper request and put it out there.
Yes, Shula.
Yep.
Well, I was going to say that I think that what you just said about goals is maybe should be one of our targets. In addition to coming up with things that are, sort of more within our current structure of how we're working, I think that another direction that we could take that would benefit Maryland really would be to look at some indicators of the health of people in Maryland, and what we believe our greatest problems are on a population as well as individual sort of clinical level, and then to come up with some targets. I think that a couple of targets which have been knocked around lately are the infection zero idea for hospitals is sort of a no nosocomial infections is sort of a big goal, but something that seems more achievable than we would have guessed. Falls are very common. Outpatient falls are very common. What about reducing the number of injurious falls by 50%? In the next period, something to that effect. Having targets like that might be a different way for us to set some goals, and then healthcare organizations obviously participate.
Right, DHMH is. I don't want to put you on the spot, Chad, but there is a population health planning going on that we are collaborating. Can you kind of give us some update on what that process is and how it's going to be connected with phase 2?
Sure. We are working on a population health plan for the state. I think some of you may have been in attendance at our summit last month. And part of the plan is the idea is to develop sustainable funding for improvement in population health status, including addressing social determinants of health as well as long-term chronic conditions. And part of the idea is to come up with the targets for health conditions. For example, do we want to reduce diabetes by 20%, by a certain date in the future? So along the lines of what you're talking about, Albert. We are struggling to come up with what those targets should look like, and whether we can actually are prepared at this point to set those targets. But we're continuing to think through that, and certainly would welcome suggestions on how to move forward with that. It is sort of, the work is to be tied together with phase 2 of the all-payer model, whatever that ends up looking like. So that's part of the idea here, and so we welcome sort of this sort of process.
I love the idea of explicitly linking up that process with our process to the extent that it's possible.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. More meetings. More meetings.
I think that our goal was, we have sort of been ruminating about this. So we would want to put this paper, this call, forward probably within the next 3 to 4 weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, with responses. Yeah.
The timing is, if you are serious about changing things for calendar year 2017, our timelines are kind of tight. So I think we'll take your, maybe we'll circulate the draft white paper call before we put it out publicly, get your comments by next week. And then in 2 weeks, I'm hoping to put it out, and maybe mid-July we expect the responses back. And that will give us a few months to evaluate and do some modeling and come back to you with some proposals, I guess. And we may need to have a meeting. I don't want to meet in August, right? I think most people are not going to be here. So we may need to have a meeting right after we get the white papers to review and discuss them before we venture into doing kind of proposal development. So we'll put those timelines out. Is that?
I think that makes sense. I think the circulating the RFP makes a lot of sense, and then that gives about 6 weeks for everyone to write their papers and get them in. And then that would also give, if once you got the submissions, you could send them out to the group, and would give us a chance to digest over the remaining pieces of July and August, and then we could jump right in.
Yep. You mean right after Labor Day?
I'll leave that to you.
And I think we are also thinking to link up with the population health a little bit more, and we may need to think about what additional, right now we are still very hospital-centric in this work group, so if we are thinking of across the providers, linking up with the phase 2, at some point we need to think about the making sure we have the right people around the table to help us in that process as well.
Before we close, I just had a question. This, unfortunately, if you'd indulge me for a second, back to the PAU, had just a question for you about, I seem to remember there's a Medicaid adjustment in the PAU, or was it just all PAUs, and or was it specific to PQIs? I don't recall.
So what we did is we calculated the PAU adjustments based on all payer PAUs, and then we look at the percent Medicaid utilization. So if hospital is at the top quartile Medicaid, we lowered their adjustment down to state average.
And what was was there some type of analysis that was done to say that hospitals that had higher proportions of Medicaid are, so what was the basis of that?
Right, looking at the relationship between the percent of Medicaid and the PAU percent, that hospitals have higher PAU levels based on their Medicaid percent.
But so we just eyeballed it, or was it a regression, or what, is there any additional?
I took it from my.
I'm sorry.
We looked at the relationship looking at a graph. It's not we did it last year too. It's not elaborate as ADA analysis. It's a crude measure. I mean, if you have other alternatives, please bring it on.
Yeah, I know
Cruise
time is
measure.
late. I'm just
We
asking
just
for
looked at the Medicaid,
clarification.
and that's what we did last year. We are doing it this year.
So it would be in last year's recommendation, it would actually show for the PAUs how it was done.
In the draft recommendation right now, you could follow it.
I think it just shows the adjustment. I don't know that it actually discusses the methodology, but I could be wrong. I may have overlooked it.
I think it's there. It should be there that the table should show you. I can show you after the meeting if you like, Bob. But we even highlighted the hospitals that made that cut, and then you can see their numbers are reviewed.
I mean, part of the reason why I bring it up, and I don't mean to belabor it because we're out of time and also out of time in doing the policies, but we had this fairly elaborate discussion about ADI and then filtering in some other, and then yet we're doing an adjustment for Medicaid in the context of the PAUs. So it just seemed like those didn't necessarily equate or weren't quite as consistent.
I acknowledge it, and I think my question is, if you have a better alternative, please bring it on.
Don't do it.
The best we can do.
That's the alternative.
Don't do it?
Yeah, don't do the Medicaid. I mean, just to get that on the record.
Okay. If that's
what I would suggest.
Propose. All right.
I may be too late, but you're saying, speak now or forever hold your peace.
No, I mean, you're going to speak at the commission meeting, I assume. So if there is an objection to do that protection, you can bring it up. It is a policy question. It is not.
Right. I'm just trying to, you've gone through
vigorously supported by the data analysis.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So that's my point.
Yeah. Yes, I agree with you.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Right. So thank you, everyone, and you'll be getting the paper sent shortly for your comment, and then and our next meeting is June 15th.
Thank you.
Thanks, Albert.